Jonathan Sherrill, welcome to the EO360 podcast. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Dave. Nice to be
Y-
on here with you.
Yeah, well, you got a great story. We just met over email recently, and I was intrigued in reading your story. Let me share with our listener here the story that intrigued me. You started working on your dad's metal roofing company, so already just something I know nothing about. Like I'm an entrepreneur, but I'm a software entrepreneur. Like metal roofing is something that's completely foreign to me. So, but as a kid, you started working with your dad. You guys sold that. They fire you eventually. And at this point, you're like in your 30s. So, like, that's the first whole half of your entrepreneurial career. And then give or take, I'm
Right.
55 and I think I'm about the halfway mark. So, give or take on that.
Sure.
But then you started another business. 4.5 years later, you sell that for this huge sum of money, like multi-generational wealth kind of money. And so this podcast is centered around the story of your exit, of your growth, your leading up to the exit. I want to hear about your relationship with your father and what that looked like, what you learned in that sale, how active you were in the sale. I want to hear about starting a new business, the mindset around that. I want to hear about selling it. So it's really, I think you have a really cool story. And that's why I asked you to join me in this podcast because I
Yeah.
want to go through this roller coaster with you and share it with the audience. Having said that, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't mention you have a business now. Now that you're out of that, you're focused on your family. You got a business called Waypoint Founders, Waypoint founders.com. And it's like a community, a coaching community for helping people figure out how to exit really, really well. Is that a fair summary?
That's a good summary. I would just expand on that a little bit. There's a lot of coaches out there that can kind of take an entrepreneur through that process. And I don't really look at myself as a coach per se. This is more of a community for preparation at multiple levels. So you have to it's a mindset preparation by and large. When you get ready to sell your baby that you built for decades, there's a mindset shift that has to happen. And so we at Waypoint Founders, we really focused on the holistic approach for that founder, and that is looking at what am I really up against. So we go behind the curtain on my deal and other deals and talk about all the kind of the twist in the road that are unforeseen to someone who's great at running a company, but they've never sold a company before. So they may not know what to expect. And there's a lot of details that go into that. But the bigger part that I really enjoy the most is kind of working through that emotional portion of it, kind of the effect that it has on a person spiritually, and ultimately kind of that identity at the end of the deal. For me, and we can talk about that in more detail, but
We will. Yeah.
it was a very big shift. At 39 years old, I had worked since I was 14, and then at 39, I sell this company, and all of a sudden I wake up the next day and my phone's not ringing anymore. I get no emails, no text messages. It's quiet. It feels like something's wrong, but it's because I sold my company and I'm no longer needed. And that's a real identity checkpoint right there. And we can dig into that. But that's the kind of stuff that we work on at Waypoint, is preparing for those things and giving purpose and meaning after the event. You know, there's not a lot of support out there for this type of thing. Nobody really wants to hear that a retired millionaire is struggling, right? But we humans are humans, and humans have issues. Just because it's not money or people issues, we all deal with those things. And so it's a community, a safe community of confidentiality that really takes in a holistic approach to that process that an entrepreneur's face when they go to sell their business.
So waypointfounders.com, and you can also find Jonathan at on LinkedIn at JC Sherrill, Sherrill. All right, Jonathan, what was I always like to start early on, and in this scenario, I think it's a perfect. Um, I really do want to hear the story from, 14 on, maybe even
Sure.
before that. Was your dad always an entrepreneur? I mean, since you can remember, was your dad an entrepreneur, or did he start that later in life?
My dad was he was in the when I at the by the time I come along and was old enough to remember anything, he was in the seafood industry. So I was born and raised on the west coast of Florida. We call it the Big Bend area. It's not the sandy beach area. It's more of the marsh and where a lot of the commercial fishing and oystering, crabbing, that kind of thing takes place. And my dad had a seafood market that he worked at and ran that bought seafood from the boats and then shipped it across the country and did some processing and shipped it to Taiwan and different places in Asia. So that was kind of what I grew up with until I was around 12 years old. And in 1993, the state of Florida outlawed commercial fishing, as it were. And so the nets were banned. It was a statewide vote, and they voted to outlaw it. So
Come on. So they just shut down all the fishermen.
completely shut it down. There
I just
was
can't imagine that. I
now,
live in the South Shore of Boston where fishing is, I mean, it's ever since the 17 and 1800s, it's been a huge industry in the Northeast. At one time, New Bedford, not too far from us, the origins of Moby Dick, that was the richest town in America because of fishing. And they just shut it down.
yeah. Well, they shut down the commercial fishing with gill nets. So any kind of net that would catch a fish was outlawed.
I
They
see.
allowed
I
you to
see.
have a very short, kind of small mesh net that really didn't catch anything. And so the crabbing, the regulations are always kind of fluid and ongoing
Yep.
with crabbing, but oystering and uh, the fishing was completely shut down. They still allow you to shrimp and things like that, but it's still a very hard way to make a living without the fishing element. So it completely killed an industry. I mean, for example, my town that I grew up in was Horseshoe Beach, Florida. Most people never heard of it. It's got a population of probably 100 people right now. Used to have about 600 people, and that's because of the fishing industry.
Hmm.
And now the people that live there are pretty much just retirees and a few old timers left, but it's kind of died off. And, it's, but that's where it was sad and it was bad at the time, but I'm grateful that my dad found a different industry to go into as a result of that net ban and those regulations. He had a friend in Tennessee that was doing some metal roofing manufacturing, and my dad needed something to do. So
So your
he's
dad's, how old was your dad at this point? Give or
he would
take?
have been, yeah, mid 30s, probably 35.
Wow. And so like boom, his job's gone.
Yeah,
For better or for worse, I'm not super familiar with the netting thing, but I've been on Instagram long enough to see why some people might say, that's not good. We should
sure.
we should take these nets away. But regardless of that, it wipes out an industry. Your dad no longer has a job.
Yeah,
So
it was,
he connects with a buddy that's doing metal roofing,
that's
nothing
right.
like fishing. All
A
right.
completely different industry. My dad didn't even have a background in any kind of construction, so it was new. But
Wow.
you know, I can't say enough good about him. He's a man of integrity and a man of great wisdom
Is he still
and
around?
work ethic. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's still around doing great. But yeah, so he and my uncle started this metal roofing company. And by the time it kind of got going, I was about 14 years old. And after school, I would go in and help them out, whatever it took, everything from sweeping floors to cutting steel. We cut it by hand back then and loading trucks. And, we were operating out of this old seafood processing facility right on the water. It didn't make, it wouldn't make business sense, but it was what he had to work with. So in this town, we're 18 miles from the nearest grocery store in this town, but he just started with what he had and it continued to grow. And by the time it was around 2001, uh, a facility came available up the road that was the former Air Force facility. So this big concrete buildings and everything was there. And so we started manufacturing at that time. prior to that, we were just buying pre-manufactured materials, but that's kind of what it really took off. And I started managing sales and ultimately became the general manager of the operation. And by
But
2000,
if I could just stop you for a second, Jonathan.
sure.
So you said he had a friend that was doing this. How did he become an owner in the business, or did he split off from the friend and start his own business?
No, the friend was just kind of and helped him with the idea and kind of how to set it up and also
Okay.
supplied some of the materials early on. But
Where did was this the friend's idea that said, hey, something to consider is like this is an industry, taught him about the industry and said, maybe you want to build something in this space?
yes, that's essentially how it went.
Did
Yeah.
the friend have any equity in the business or is just a buddy
No,
helping out?
just a buddy. Yeah,
Wow,
just helping him out.
amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was all bootstrapped, no loans. And then my dad didn't have, it wasn't like he had a nest egg or wealth to work with, but it was just little by little doing right by the customer, paying his vendors on time, taking good care of the customers. And, he's a giver, a tither, and he was just really blessed as a result. And a lot of hard work went into it. A lot of the people that lost their jobs had worked for my dad. When I say lost their jobs from that prior
Yeah.
regulation, right? All the fishing uh, industry basically been being shut down. So a lot of those people came to work for him in this business. So it kind of created jobs in that community for quite some time. Um, but moving on to kind of, I worked for him through in several different roles, and then ultimately kind of became the general manager. My dad and uncle kind of stepped back and was more absentee for a few years. And then they decided they wanted to sell the business. And at that time, and this was 2010, I never heard of selling a business before. I didn't know that was really a thing.
And how old were
And
you in 2010?
I would have been, well, I was born in 82, so do the math.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Something
was in
old,
my
right?
in my 20s, probably 27-ish.
Yeah.
So, but I always wanted to grow. I never felt super comfortable kind of professionally in that small town setting. I always kind of wanted to be out, but going to college was not an option. Just the way we were raised in the situation. So, but I was kind of always reaching. In the meantime, I got my pilot license, my commercial pilot license, just kind of trying to find a way out. But I was also savvy enough, thankfully, to realize I had a good job and I didn't need to just leave my job and go kind of search the world for something better. So I just stuck with it. And when that time come to sell the business, I went all in on it. I had just started taking college courses on business, like go for my business degree online. And so right when I was doing that, my dad come to me and said, "We want to sell this business." And I was kind of already the point man, being the general manager. You just kind of handle everything. And so when it came time for negotiations and due diligence and things like that, I was very much involved. And then when the process for due diligence came, I was the point person. So I got kind of dumped into this thing willingly. I mean, I wanted to be involved, but I was handling the sell side for my dad and uncle on their business. I had never done it before, but I was just kind of rolling with it. And a lot of things I was learning, which was really interesting. I was taking courses at night at home online, and I would come in the next day and I would use what I had just learned. I mean, it was pretty
Yeah.
crazy,
Wait,
so
so let me back up for a second. Um, did 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 uh, did you have friends that were going to school, college?
not really. No, nobody I was close with.
So this is a small town,
Yeah.
blue collar town, fishermen, and then not fishermen, and
Yeah.
just trying to find something. So this is not, you weren't really raised in an environment where you saw all your peers going to school, going to college, and then finding something from there. So with that in mind, did you miss the opportunity of going to school after high school?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't really an option, and what I mean by that is it was something that just the way I was brought up in the community, the church, and my family, kind of the history there was nobody really went to college,
Hmm.
and that was
Yeah,
seemed
yeah.
really, and it was almost frowned upon. And when I say that, it wasn't so much by my parents, it was more the overarching kind of church, if you will, and the community I grew up in, which
What was
wasn't
the
an
church?
organized church, but it was a more kind of a split off of what you might know as a Pentecostal church,
Okay.
right? And so what ended up happening in the years about that time and in the years that followed, there was a kind of a big awakening, you might say, where people realized, look, we don't have to be this tight. We don't have to be this reserved. It was easy to be. I mean, you're 18 miles from the nearest grocery store in this tiny town. It's easy to fall into that little small-minded, you know, uh, self self-sufficient. We don't need the outside world feeding our children kind of thing, right? But and we're the people that kind of were part of all that, it's all kind of dissolved and no one really follows that anymore. But I was kind of just on the edge of when they started opening up and
Was
allowing people to go to college and things. And so it wasn't a cult, it was just a very kind of strict religious church system, you might call it.
was there a point, and maybe we're not there yet in the story, but was there a point where you felt free to go explore, to be bigger, to get outside of that community?
Well, this was the beginning of that.
Yeah,
And
okay.
so once we saw it through and sold that business, that's when I kind of spread my wings. I mean, I was able to then run the company for the new owner. And I don't know if you want to jump to that
No, let's
or carry it.
not quite yet. Hold on, because I still have more questions about before the sale. So your dad and your uncle were the owners of the business. Was it a 50-50 split between them?
Yes, it was.
Um, and you had no equity in that business. You basically had a good job. That was it.
Correct. Yep.
Okay. Um, what led to, because they're not that old. Like, what led to their decision to sell? Why not just keep going and make money?
Yeah, I think, I don't think the metal roofing was ever, it was a necessity business, something they both needed. I
They
don't
didn't
think
love it.
they either
Yeah.
one loved it. And my uncle had other aspirations, ended up moving to Montana and has a ranch out there. And, that's what him and his family wanted to do. And my dad was uh, more into doing other things. Real estate was kind of became his thing that he found that was really what he was good at and wanted to do. So I think it just wasn't fulfilling and kind of a long term. They saw an opportunity to sell it and kind of go pursue their individual passions
All right, so
in
that right there,
business.
you just said they saw an opportunity to sell it. Does that mean they were approached, or does that mean they realized they had something of value and they decided to go out looking for a buyer?
No, they realized they had something of value, and my dad had a sort of a business coach, you might say, just someone he talked to occasionally that
Mhm.
kind of shared with him like, "Hey, this is something you could sell." He knew enough about the business to say this is a sellable business,
Yeah.
and we should, if you are interested in selling it, you have something here.
And based on what I know, this was not a small sale. I mean, this was I know you can't share the numbers, but I mean this was for both your uncle and your father lifetime money. I mean, this is the kind
Absolutely,
of thing
yeah.
that they would never need to work again. Um, all right, so take me through this process now. You're kind of running the operations around the sale. Did you hire a broker, or how
Yes,
did you find a buyer?
we hired. Yeah, my dad and uncle hired the a broker and kind of ran point on, getting the thing ready, getting the presentation ready, the sim, and reaching out to potential interested parties.
Now, was it an
Um,
investment banker or a broker, or I'm not.
I would call it a broker.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, and not knowing a lot about what's out there, and this is a trap. And by the way, this is something Waypoint digs in very deeply. Is it's easy to just kind of go for the first one that seems like they know what they're talking about when you don't know, right? And so the
Talking about
experts,
brokers. Go for the broker.
brokers,
Yeah, yeah.
and really you can fill that blank in with a lot of different people you're going to be involved with, attorneys, CPAs doing quality of earnings. The list goes on of people you could just be like, oh, they seem to know what they're talking about. they know more than I do, so let's hire them to do this piece of it. And so those are things you can potential traps, potential sandbars you can run aground on. And so um, thankfully it worked out. I think in retrospect, things could have been handled a little bit better, but you don't know what you don't know. And what I mean by that, I think we could have gotten a better sell-side advisor, at least interviewed a few and really gotten references. But at the end of the day, it worked out and they got a good deal.
The sell
And
side advisor, is that the broker?
yes, that's the broker.
Okay. What is the difference between a broker and investment banker? I mean, I know investment bankers generally are dealing with bigger deals, brokers are generally dealing with smaller deals, but like what
Yeah.
exactly is the difference?
I don't know that there's a specific like dictionary definition difference in terms of here's the way the industry thinks of it. Okay, broker would be your smaller company. So if you have a HVAC company, right, or a construction company, and maybe you're doing 5 million a year in sales, just pick a number like that. Typically, you're going to work with a business broker. They're going to come look at your financials, get put together a sim and reach out to potential buyers, probably people they already know that they've sold companies to. And that's a very needed thing. But if you're in that, what we call middle market, which is typically the higher, you're under a billion, but you're definitely over kind of 10 million in revenue. So we like to think of middle market as somewhere in the maybe 3 to 4 million up to 50 million in EBITDA. So that's kind of that middle market that we think of, and that's where a really good sell side advisor is valuable. You don't want that traditional business broker because they're just going to kind of do what they do for these smaller companies. You want to run a competitive bid process, and that's what a good sell side advisor can do. And they can get very creative on bringing in even international interests and interest across industries that can be strategic. That if you're a HVAC company, for example, a small one, you're probably going to sell to another HVAC company that wants to grow. But, in our case, we had very interested parties that were in different industries that were interested in buying us, that were strategic buyers. So that's something that a sell side advisor can bring in. And and then you have the investment bankers. Typically, they are on bigger deals, definitely in the middle market, but they're typically on the bigger deals. But the investment bankers, they help with growing capital. They help with uh, representing both sides oftentimes. So those are things you kind of want to be careful of because you don't want someone who has conflicting interest. They want to get you a good deal, but they also have a buyer that's in their back pocket too that is going to benefit them on an ongoing basis. So you want someone who's going after every penny they can get for you and get your deal done on your terms. And that's where a good sell side advisor comes in.
How long was this process for you and your dad?
Yeah,
And
that
and I want to get past this one because I think it gets a little juicier in your next business, in your sale, which was all yours, and the business that you built in 4.5 years, which is
sure.
crazy. So, but before we do that, let's wrap up this sale. How long was the process beginning to end?
We started this. My dad talked to me about possibly selling the business in August of 2010, and they the wire hit their account, and it was a done deal by December 13th, 2010.
Wow. Wow,
Yeah,
that's super
so
fast. So the due diligence was that any tell me about the due diligence.
it was pretty typical. However, the buyer was uh, it was his first acquisitions on his own. So this gentleman that bought my dad's company was an investment banker on Wall Street doing massive deals. He was actually CEO of Lehman Brothers like way, way back long before it collapsed and all that happened. But that's the level of person we were dealing with, that he kind of had retired from Wall Street and had started his own investment company. And he hired a manager from Goldman Sachs to come run that for him. So we were the first deal of this new venture that he was on. And the Goldman guy wanted to make sure he crossed his T's and dotted his I's on the first deal, right? I mean, he's working for a new boss and they're starting this thing off. So they put $1 million worth of due diligence into this deal.
Oh man.
on their end that they paid for.
Yeah.
So it was pretty significant. It was pretty heavy duty stuff. They really didn't leave any stones unturned.
Where, yeah, where did things like what kinds of things were they looking at, and what were you prepared for, and what were you unprepared for in the diligence process?
Well, I was probably on that deal unprepared for all of it, honestly, because I didn't know what to expect. I just took it as it came. But the typical stuff was all there as far as due diligence goes, and that's everything from definitely on the financial side. I mean, they sit down a group of guys from New Jersey that were, you know, kind of almost overkill for a deal. Even though it was a good sized deal, they were like overkill for this deal. And they come in and did a full financial audit. And, I'm the point person for that. I'm learning a ton every day and trying to answer their questions and help them get what they're looking for. Due diligence covers every aspect of a business. Honestly, it's everything from your customers, your customer concentration, your product, is your product line diversified? What's your products that you're selling? Is it one product that if one little thing changed in the market or supply chain would put the business out, right? There's just a lot of things they're looking at. They're looking at payroll and staff and tenure, um, your receivables, or any kind of hidden stuff in the receivables or payables or how you're managing every aspect of the business.
They
And
interviewed some of your customers, I'm assuming.
they did interview a few of them.
Yeah,
That's a touchy subject because if it don't work,
yeah.
you don't want your customers worried, right? The change is coming. So who they're used to dealing with, is this going to continue? So, and they're aware of that. So I think, um, but vendors, they want to talk to the vendors, some of the vendors, but it's really, you could do a few podcasts, probably just on due diligence and the detail that goes
Yeah,
into
yeah, yeah.
even really
That's
almost every deal, but some are a lot more extensive and expansive than others when it comes
That's a
to due
great idea,
diligence.
actually, to do a podcast just on due diligence. So the buying process, in my experience, the buying process was, in my first sale, we did not have a broker or an investment banker, which I will do it differently the next time around. But we were approached by private equity. They asked for some basic numbers, and as an NDA, asked for some basic numbers, and then they offered us an LOI, letter of intent, basically saying, look, if all this lines up, if we get through the due diligence, then this is the amount that we believe will pay you for the business. This is about how long we expect. So it's a very short letter basically saying, here's our intent. Um, and we both signed it, and we jumped into due diligence, which can get a little intense, very, very
Sure.
intense. Because at this point, you got this big number you're looking at.
Mhm.
You haven't, for me, I'm already thinking about like lifestyle after the
Of
sale,
course.
but the sale's not done. And my understanding is like 50% of businesses don't sell after the letter of intent. Due diligence blows up about half of them. And then there's also some buyers that, they give you a letter of intent, but they're going to be looking for tons of ways to bring that number down.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So then after the due diligence, there's some negotiation with your team, lawyers, CPAs, and then ultimately there's a close.
Right.
Did I summarize that? Was that the process for your dad?
It was, similar, but there again, we had a representation already. We had a sell side advisor. So
Yeah.
that you try with a good sell side advisor, you they're going to advise on getting everything in order ahead of time. Go ahead and do your own quality of earnings in most cases. So that way, when you finally get that LOI agreed on from a buyer, you know where you are with your books, you know where you are with your financials. And so they're looking for problems. And they should, but they're not going to find problems that you don't know about
You you
and
s-
that
you
you've
s-
already disclosed.
you use this phrase quality of earnings twice, and I don't know what that is. What does quality of earnings mean?
Yeah, it's a accounting. it's in the accounting world, a term used. It's basically an audit, but it's really just to go through and make sure that you're representing the numbers as they truly are, the real EBITDA, the real cash flow, the real balance sheet. And so it's basically an audit, but it's really centered on the upcoming sale of the business. And so it's really focuses on answering what these investors are going to be looking for.
Okay. All right. And I'm asking Chat GPT here as we go, is the EBITDA real? Is it repeatable? Is it sustainable? Is it clean?
Yep,
Word clean has a lot in it.
absolutely.
You,
But think about this, you have a buyer approach a business owner, and they look at your top line and bottom line and say, we'll give you X. And that's based on those numbers. And then they're going to go in there and look for ways for it not to be X.
Mhm.
The top line might be the same. It probably is, but that bottom line can be a lot of variations, right? And so it depends on how far back you go and the way you kept your books. And um, so having super clean financials, at least getting that quality of earnings so that then they're clean and you're keeping them current as you go through as each month closes. The group that did the quality of earnings is also updating that quality of earnings throughout due diligence. It's it really gives a buyer confidence in those numbers, but it also limits their leverage to be able to come back and retrade based on anything to do with the financials. And
Do you
so
have
you
a
can,
do you have a recommendation? So it's harder when there's investors involved, but when there's no investors involved, and let's just say you're a sole proprietor, or a single owner in the business. Um, my son, for example, he has a small Hawaiian flannel shirt company. Super proud of him. It's thekonabrand.com is my little plug
nice.
for him. Really, really cool business. But it's just him. It's a one man show. And so he has the option to expense his car for certain reasons and certain things. And to when he takes people out to dinner or drinks, he can, expense that stuff. And there's some subjectivity, I believe, maybe not for an accountant, but for an entrepreneur, some subjectivity on what you can expense and what you can't expense. The more you expense, though, the greater your expenses go up
Sure.
and the less your tax burden. But when you go to sell, now all of a sudden it looks like your expenses are really high.
Yeah.
Now, my understanding, and this is my question is, when you get into due diligence, typically the buyer can pretty easily determine that, yeah, all of this is fluff that we can cut out when we acquire it. They don't, the owner's not going to need a car. The owner's probably not going to do all this uh, dinner and entertainment. So, and the owner's probably not going to need a salary that high, or maybe the owner's going to need a salary higher, or the operator, the CEO. So, like, they take all that into consideration to do due diligence, correct?
That's correct. And a good quality of earnings is going to do work with you, the owner, and figure those things out ahead of time.
Yeah.
That way
Okay.
we call it the adjusted EBITDA, which is EBITDA, but that's been adjusted for, that expensive
Adjusted. Yeah.
vehicle you wrote off, right? And they're going to you said it exactly right. They're going to true it up. So what's realistic? Do you have a, a, a I don't know, a mom that's coming in and doing all the bookkeeping for you for free because she loves you, whatever,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But they
Yeah.
know when they
Yeah.
buy
Yeah.
it, they got to pay a bookkeeper. So
That's right.
it
Or
can
a
go
mom
both
that comes in to
ways.
help you fulfill orders around
Sure.
Christmas time because she loves you and she doesn't
Right.
need any money. Yep. I get it.
But if you're taking a private jet to Florida because you like the luxury of it and it's not necessary and they know that. And that's the realistic part of it. So I think that's a sophisticated buyer knows this. And so if you have a good quality of earnings that's kind of vetted all that out ahead of time and then you show them, they might tweak it a little bit, but it's not going to have massive tweaks. It's going to be, they're going to appreciate that you've taken the time to go through there and true it up. And they especially when you show some, for example, when we sold our business a couple years ago, we were our rent was really low. My dad owned the real estate, and we ahead of time we figured out what the market rate was around us and plugged in a realistic rent number as an adjustment to that EBITDA. So, when they see you doing that kind of thing, it gives them a lot of confidence.
Yeah. Okay. So how long do you work for the company before you're fired?
I was there 6 years after my dad sold.
And what was at what point, why did they let you go? And was this desirable? Are you grateful? Were you looking to get out of it?
Well, I'm
Or,
grateful now. I
but
wasn't
at the
grateful the
time
day it
you were like,
happened.
damn, I just lost my job.
Yeah, so what really happened there, we grew the business significantly. And that was what going back to kind of that was what got me out. I
Yep.
moved the headquarters out of that tiny town. We opened the headquarters over in Gainesville, Florida, where the University of Florida is. And so it was an opportunity for me and my family to move as well. But with that, we added several manufacturing locations throughout Florida. So we ended up with 5 locations, and the headquarters was there. And so I
So
was
this is
able to kind
working.
of
The
really,
investor's happy with
they
this.
they're
Like,
very happy.
yeah.
They're extremely happy with some of the moves that we made, and one of the facilities we opened in South Florida was larger and more volume going through it than any of the others, than the one they bought initially, right? So there was some significant growth. Our head count went up tremendously. I started learning, I started learning this when we started working on due diligence, really, but it never ended. Really learning what a buyer and investor is looking for in a business, because these investors were talking to me every week. I had to put a full blown report together, financial report, showing everything that happened that week. And then monthly reports were a deeper dive. And then we had quarterly board meetings where we did a full, thorough review of where the business was for the quarter and where we're headed, what our plan is. And so that's a big change for a country boy like me from a tiny town where we just kind of did everything. We did whatever needed to be done in the
I mean,
business to take care of our people, to care of our customers, but there was not a lot of strategic planning, as it were, and there was no sort of leadership team. I built out a leadership team with their help and their prodding. We had functional heads of finance, operations, sales, and the like, and so now I'm no longer the frontline guys are coming to my desk for answers. There's a person they report to, and then there's probably a supervisor they report to first, right? And then a VP. And so that was a new way of doing business, but it all made sense. But what really ended up ending my time there was I had approached the owner. He was late 70s, maybe early 80s year old at the time. Um, and didn't need a partner. Obviously he had his own money, but I wanted to be a business partner. So I approached him about that idea. I said, is there an opportunity to be an equity partner, even if it's over time, something I can work towards? And his response was, that's something that's fine to want that. And maybe it's probably not something we have available here, but you'd be a good partner if we were looking for partners. That's what he told me. And I gave it some time. I gave it probably 9 months, and approached him again after a board meeting. I said, one-on-one talk with him, and he said, no, we don't have that. That's not an option. I said, okay. So about a month later, I get this call from his secretary and wants to line up a meeting, and which was very odd because we only met in person at board meetings and everything else was over the phone. But he wanted to come down. And so, long story short, come down to my office, uh, and I thought we were going to be meeting about a new facility we're going to be putting in. And he asked to see me in my office, and he said, "It's clear to me you want to be an entrepreneur, and we don't have any room for that here." He said, "And I'm going to let you go."
That's amazing. So do you think that was a gift? I mean, to me, it sounds like he was almost behaving like a mentor saying, bro, get out of here. Stop, leave.
I mean, I don't know your belief system, but I believe it was divine intervention. Honestly, I do. I don't think it even made sense to him because the business was growing and doing everything an investor would want it to do. We were very healthy financially. Uh, Great processes, systems were built. We were in expand mode and doing it without him putting more capital in. I mean, it was going really well. And I think I think it kind of, I'm not sure it made 100% sense to him, but it was a gift to me. At the time, it was horrible. I mean, I had to go out. I left and kind of ushered out my side door. I mean, they were kind and they were civil about it, but it was, I couldn't go through the office until say goodbye to people, that I was there since the day the business opened, right? And so
Hmm.
everybody I had hired or been involved in the hiring. And so it could
Since you were
have, I wish that
14,
part,
Jonathan, since you were 14 years
yeah,
old. Yeah, that
yeah.
must have been emotional for you, I would
It
admit.
was, it
Yeah.
was. And then, I had a pretty strict non-compete as well, which
Okay.
was it's fully enforceable. So even though I had no equity, I had a 3-year non-compete.
I
And
mean, you were there for a while. You were super successful in helping grow the business. Financially, were you okay for a little while, or were you
not for
looking at your?
long. I mean, and it was I had a 6-month severance package. So once that was out, I was going to be in trouble if I didn't have something. So,
Okay.
we started looking for something to do. And my wife and I, we went to Colorado to get just to visit to see if there was an option up there to start the same business, on a small scale. And because it got me out of the non-compete, the whole the Southeast US was part of that non-compete territory.
Hmm.
So we went out there. She got altitude sickness. We come back home. We're like, that's not going to work. And my dad had started this little building. He actually bought it from the company he sold. So this little division that was a metal building division. And he offered me to come help him, work with him. It was very small and was a step down, you might say. Uh, but I didn't see another option at the time, and that it didn't violate the non-compete, so it was a job. And so I started working for him. He put me in charge of it, and um, pretty quick, we decided to sell that business. And the reason for it, he had ordered this equipment for a very high-end equipment, very expensive equipment to manufacture steel building components. And these are the red beams you see that go up on these big, wide clear span buildings. So we call them Z purlins, C purlins, things like that. And it, I don't think he really had a clear plan on starting that up and integrating it into the business. And over a period of a few weeks, we kind of worked out, let's become partners. Let's start a brand new business and sell this one. And we'll go into this steel building components business. It doesn't violate my non-compete, so I'm good there. And so we did that. And then the facility, we
Wait,
needed a facility for this.
let me
Go
see
ahead.
if I got this straight. So basically, your dad's doing another business, and he has this instrument he's not really using, doesn't really know what to do with it. And you're like, hey, that looks pretty cool. I think I could do stuff with that. Did I get that right?
Close. He had ordered it. It was about a 12-month lead time. And so there was still a few months left before the equipment was going to be delivered.
And he just bought it because he's like, yeah, that's cool. I'll bet I can figure something out to do with that. And you came in and
Essentially,
you're like,
yeah.
I'll bet I can figure out something to do with that. And he's like, hey, why don't you go figure out something to do with that? And you build a business.
Right.
How did you split the equity in that? Because I mean, obviously he's an investor giving you this piece of equipment.
Yeah.
What did that mean for equity?
We negotiated that and made it where it was good for him and really good for me if it worked out. I mean, so
Good.
um,
Okay.
he gets his investment paid back,
Yeah.
and then things are split up accordingly.
Yeah. Okay.
But I learned a little bit of negotiating at my time with the other company, so I might have put it to use. But no, it worked out great. He was very happy with the deal, and I was too.
Yeah. Okay. Fair
He's
enough.
he's a great dad and a very fair man.
But you
Uh,
you were the controlling shareholder in that business.
well, no, I mean he had the majority on that.
Okay.
And that's really not a secret. I mean, he was 51%, I was 49%.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. So he was basically providing all the source of
yeah,
it, which it makes sense.
yeah.
And then was he involved in the business outside of that, or was it like an investment?
No, he's like, I don't want to be involved in it. You could take it and run with it,
Okay. So you're running
So
this business. He's a silent partner,
yeah,
but you get the equipment.
yeah.
And But 4.5 years, really fast to an exit.
Yeah. And that you were talking about the story of things. I'll give you a kind of a quick story on how those steps went. So he had bought this shut down Georgia Pacific sawmill. You heard of Georgia Pacific? I
Yep,
think it's
yep.
owned by Blue Links now. It was in the town where, nearby, near our hometown. And it had been shut down for like 15 years. So he cold called them, and they agreed to sell it to him. So he bought this facility, and we were going to set up this new business at this large, sprawling, sawmill. And in the meantime, he was selling off some of the equipment left behind by Georgia Pacific. And the buyers of that equipment ended up suggesting, what if we bought the whole thing from you and just reopened the mill ourselves? So, and that took a few weeks of negotiating and talking, but that was essentially what happened. So now this place is being sold, and we still don't have a place for this equipment and this new business to go. And while that's going on, I'm still trying to help sell the small steel building business. And Georgia Pacific called him after that sale and said, we have another one up in Georgia, a town called Claxton, Georgia. I'd never heard of it before. And we'd like to sell you that if you're interested. So he goes and looks at it, buys that one. And we kind of both realized, I think without even talking about it, like, that's where we're going to have to put the business. And I had to tell my wife. She had just opened a clothing boutique, children's clothing boutique, about a year prior. And that's like, I think we're going to have to move. I mean, when you don't have a job and you don't have any
Yeah,
any nest egg, you
yeah,
kind of got to go where it's at, right? And so
yeah.
we uprooted, me, my wife, and my daughter, and moved to this town in Georgia we never heard of before, over near Savannah. And so that's where we started, in that mill. And it had been shut down for probably 15, 20 years as well. And it had been built back in the 60s. So it was very old and decrepit, and had to completely renovate all of it in order to use it. But it had acreage, it had concrete, and these machines that were coming in needed a big space, a big footprint. So we just started doing it. I had one guy that moved up to Georgia with me that had done some work for us in the past, and we didn't know anybody, didn't know any customers, didn't know any employees to hire. It was all brand new, but um, we were blessed. I mean, we worked hard and just started figuring it out.
What were you selling? What was the product?
We were selling. So, are you familiar with like the multi-story self-storage units that are like
Yeah,
3, 4 stories tall?
yeah,
U-Haul, public storage, those
yeah,
types.
yeah.
The components that make up the frame for those. So that was a big part of our sales. We sell that, we call them C purlins or Gerts.
Hmm.
And that was a huge part of what we sold. We also sold complete building packages that were engineered. So we were a partner in this engineering company, and we would design these buildings, whether it's a garage in someone's backyard or it could be a commercial, manufacturing space. We did work for, we sold some buildings to Tesla and to SpaceX, and that was some of the bigger projects. We did work with, like I said, public storage, and these are the contractors building out these things. And so um, that's what really kind of boosted us. And then we started building out dealer networks. So the dealers would design the custom buildings, and they would sell it to their customers. And so the software allowed us to do that, and it was very easy to use the software and quick to learn. So we was able to set up quite a few dealers in a relatively short amount of time.
So
Uh,
basically, your dad's your investor.
yeah,
Did you have any other outside investors?
no,
Okay, so your dad's your main investor, and this is your business that you're running. And 4 years goes by. Obviously, with some of those names you're describing, you have big contracts. What happens in about 4 years that leads you to a sale? I mean, in a lot of people would say this is going really well. Keep it going, get it
yeah,
bigger, make more money. You got a
sure.
job, like keep it going. So, what triggered the decision to sell?
When I started the business, first of all, I had learned a lot about what an investor wants from a business. And I knew that one day I want to sell this before we ever started. I'm like,
So build to sell,
we're
man.
gonna
This
build
was
it to
built
sell
built
from
to
day
sell. Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
And in my mind, I'm thinking 15, 20 years down the road, maybe we'll sell. But in the meantime, it'll make us a good living and a lifestyle and
So it's
be
not a
secure.
purpose-driven business. It's not the kind of thing where you're trying to change the world with steel. This is like you got an opportunity, looks pretty cool. You think you can make some money, and you're like, I want to build this. And I like that. To me, a lot of people are like all into the purpose-driven stuff. I like the
Mhm.
game. I
Yeah.
really like the game of
Yeah.
building something that creates value for enough people out there so that this entity that you've created actually has value itself. I think it's really cool
Yeah.
game to play.
Absolutely. Same. And that was the plan. I thought I would be there 15, 20 years and maybe longer, but have something valuable and then sell it. And 3.5 years in. So 4.5 years is how long it took or how long we owned it before we sold. But my deal took a full year. I told you my dad's took three
Yeah.
months or whatever.
Yeah.
From the time we seriously pulled the trigger till we closed the deal was a full 12 months.
So it was only 3.5 years of running it
It
before you
was
had a
before we
buyer.
made that decision, before we
Wow.
made the decision to do it.
That's
And
nothing in entrepreneurship. I mean, three and a
yeah,
half years. That's crazy.
yeah, it had started making money and, it was starting to prove itself as this is a legitimate business.
I'd
That
say.
it wasn't that it was, you know, ultra significant. It was just this is a real business. There's systems, there's people, there's process, and there's a customers in need for what we have. So we have a real product and a real business here.
I don't want you to
But
minimize this because
yeah,
you can't share the numbers publicly, but you shared them with me, and it's multi-generational wealth that you sold this business for. I mean, this is lifelong money for generations. This is not a small deal that you
yeah,
sold this for.
yeah,
And so like in 3.5 years, that's outrageous, like crazy.
yeah. You know, here's kind of where how it came about, and I get very granular on this in the book that we recently wrote. But it's
In the
yeah,
book, by the way, is The Extraordinary Exit. You can find that on Waypoint Founders or even on Amazon, if I'm not mistaken,
it
right?
is. It's
Okay.
on Amazon, Audible, you can listen to it or read it in any format. But we were so back up a little bit. My daughter was 12 years old at the time that we decided to sell. And so I have one child, my wife and I have our daughter Faith, and she was diagnosed with autism at 2 years old. And I'd never heard the word autism before that. I mean, it's very common nowadays, but it was brand new to me. And so we started really seeing, the symptoms and the proof was like, wow, she's really not hitting her milestones. And so that was a very stressful journey for us and especially for my wife, just a very heavy load to try to get her help and to figure out what we can do to help her and maximize her, give her the best chance at a successful life. And so this is all going on. We found that out when she was 2. So that was 2011, shortly after the company sold. My dad's company sold. And s- so fast forward to 2021, I've owned the business 3.5 years, quick and steel. And we're on vacation in Maine. My wife has family in Maine. We like to go up there and it's just, we get off kind of off the grid and just have a good time. And we were up there and I've always liked to walk and I like to go out in the evening time, walk, pray, meditate. And, I was out on one of those walks right before we're leaving to go home the next day. And I've never had this happen before. I'm not one of the people that have things like this happen. But I had, best way I know to call it, a vision. And I see this light, this little amber colored dim light. And I'm not called away. I'm very aware of my surroundings and everything, but I just see this light. It comes across and goes and sort of down in my peripheral. And there's this open book. And I can't read the book, but I can see that it's a Bible. And it goes up to the top of the page and I read, and just like I'm reading a book, and it says Isaiah. And it goes down, it says 58. I could see it was chapter 58, verse 6. And in that moment, I didn't even remember if there were that many chapters in the book, right? And so I, everything disappears, and I'm back to standing there on the side of this hill,
What
and
the heck, man?
I
Jonathan, you
hope,
realize how wild that sounds, right?
I
Like
know, and
it's
that's I'm hesitant to tell it because I don't, it's like I'm really vulnerable here. But
I
you
think
wanted to
it's
know what?
amazing though. I love that you share that because
Yeah,
you sharing that just expresses to me how real it was to you. Well,
absolutely.
I have no idea what happened, but I mean, it
Yeah,
doesn't matter. What matters
yeah,
is to you, this happened.
yeah.
That's incredible.
I open up the app on my phone,
Yeah,
the Bible app, and read those two verses that I highlighted,
that's awesome. By the way,
verse
about the
6 and
Bible
7.
app. I didn't know there was a
Yeah.
Bible app, but of
Oh
course
yeah.
there is. Okay.
There's an app for everything. I think it had 1 billion downloads recently. But anyway, so I read it, and none of this is like, oh wow, I need to sell my business. This is very clear. It was just, I read this, and it's talking about the fast that is chosen to feed the poor and to take care of your, the people around you, and like this is what God's telling his people. Like this is what I really care about, because they were doing all these other things to try to get God's attention, right? But the last line on that verse said, and to not forsake your flesh and blood. And
Your body.
I
Yeah.
am studying on this. I'm like, obviously, I need to do more of these other things. I need to feed the poor. I need to clothe in our day, how does that apply to what the need is? But I couldn't get away from that flesh and blood part. And um, on the way home, I mean, we drive pretty much everywhere we go. I fly, but my wife doesn't like to fly. So when we go together, it's usually a road trip. So there's 24 hours of driving time back home, and I've got a lot of time to think about this. And I tell her about it, and neither one of us know what it means. It's cool, it's neat, but anyway, I get home, and Sunday night, I'm about to go to work the next. I've been off all couple weeks, so Sunday night, I'm sitting on my couch in my living room and alone and thinking about all the stuff going on back at the business and kind of getting my mind prepared. And just still small voice, you might call it, was like, maybe it's time to sell the business. So I knew it was time to sell at that time. But I wasn't planning on selling it at that time. It's just that this sense kind of come over me like, maybe now it's time. And so I talked to my wife about that, and she was a little hesitant, and rightfully so. I mean, we had just started making a little bit of money with the business, and nothing significant as far as that we were taking home. I mean, there's still, just because the business is now turning a profit doesn't mean it's showing up in my bank account, right? And all
Yeah.
entrepreneurs
Oh,
know
we
that.
all know that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I ended up talking to my dad about it. And I definitely didn't expect him to be like super agreeable. I thought he would be very cautious and all. He's like, hey, if that's what you want to do. And I didn't tell him about the vision either. I just told him about, I'm thinking about maybe we should sell the business. And those two things that happened, the vision in Maine and then kind of that moment on my couch, they began to connect more and more. They weren't like, oh, that's why I had the vision, because in that moment I thought of selling the business. Like, the dots didn't connect immediately. But as I mulled it over the next few days, I'm like, I got this kind of this heavy sense, like I feel like my daughter's got another 5 years of real growth opportunity, that if I can be there for her personally and financially and set her up, we'll give her the best chance to succeed as an adult. But there's a lot of steps that, as a dad, as a parent, some things you just know, you don't know how to explain it. You just kind of know it in your knower. And that's what it was. And I I told my dad about it. I was like, this is my why. This is why I want to do it. In which he was fully supportive of. And that why, I wrote it down. I mean, that became the driving force for why I wanted to see this all the way through. And I had no idea what the results of that would be. I mean, I had a number based on my prior experience working with some EBITDA multiples and things. I knew what my dad's business sold for. And the number that I thought we could get for that business was something that was manageable for us, but it wasn't like generational wealth. I mean, I guess it could have been if you manage it right, but it was. it was kind of this will be good, not necessarily great, but if we can get this, it'll be good.
And you
And
ended up obviously because I think I know where you landed. You ended up many times past what you
yeah,
expected.
yeah,
How did
we
that
did.
happen? Did you get in this case, a broker or an investment banker? Which
I,
direction did you go in?
I had hired a business coach 3 months prior to that time. Of course, no, had nothing to do with the sale of the business. I didn't know I was going to be selling it. Just and that's another story on how that came about. But I wasn't looking for a coach, but it just fell in place, and I thought, well, I'll try it out, and kept trying it out, and stayed with him. But amazing man that was my coach, and I shared this with him, and we kind of got to work on a plan. And he introduced me to Andy Harris, my sell side advisor and also co-author of the book. Um, but we got to work on that, and Andy works for a premier sell side advisory company, and they're known for getting people multiple, like 30% is not uncommon at all to be above 30% more than what kind of market rate is. And in some cases up to 200 and 300% more, because they're very good at finding strategic fits and finding those synergies that strategic buyers will pay a premium for.
Hmm.
And so I was very blessed to my coach to have that connection to connect me with him. And what ended up happening though is the business kept growing during that time. So from the time I reached out to the advisor, to Andy, until we closed, we kept growing, significant growth, and the bottom line and top line growth. And of course,
Investors like growth. Like that's
they
the
love
number
growth.
one
Yeah.
thing they're looking for is they
Yeah.
don't care about a well-run business as much as they care about growth, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so as a result of all of the growth and a solid company and the systems in place, and like we talked earlier, built to sell, we built this business as if we were going to sell it. Even though I was thinking 15, 20 years down the road, I wanted to build it as if I'm selling it at any time. Because one thing that does is gives me freedom as the owner.
Yeah.
You're not, every decision's not relying on you, right? So anyway, we had a very sellable business, and the growth that happened in that year, we got kind of the upper end of any business like ours in this industry goes for. And you know, we the buyers were tickled pink to have it. We had competing bids going, and they weren't the only one. I mean, we actually went with one that was slightly under what the highest offer was. And that's a whole other topic, but that's where you get into what are your must-haves and like-to-haves.
Hmm.
And this buyer we went with covered all of my must-haves and all of my like-to-haves that was established early on when I started working with Andy. We get all that down first. Talk a lot about that in the book as well. But yeah, and yeah, that was incredible journey.
Now, were
And
you out right away?
I was a must have,
That's incredible. All right.
because
So,
yeah, I mean, because that was my point. My why was to take care of my daughter, have freedom to spend time with her, to move back home was a big part of it. When we sell, we're going to move back home to Florida because we had moved out to Georgia. And so we did that immediately. And yeah, I didn't want to stay and have a boss and work for someone for 2 or 3 years and be under more stress and more pressure than before. So that was a must have.
no, I remember selling my company, and I've talked to plenty of people that went through this drought after this emotional drought. I don't know if that makes any sense. I just made that up, but like they go through this the change throws them off. It didn't for me. However, I will say in the year between getting out of my business and starting a new one, year and a half or so, I don't have any memory of that year and a half. Like I don't remember what I did. It's just kind of a blank. It was a period of time where I didn't really have a purpose, and I just feel like it's gone. I don't know what happened to it. And I know I was, caretaking for my kids with my wife and doing Boy Scout stuff and traveling a little bit, but it's like it's all lost. What happened to you the day after you walk out of your office with a box in your hands, once again, kind of getting fired?
Yeah. Yeah. I fired myself on this one. The first couple days, it's kind of like, it's a little heavy, but it's also like going on vacation. You know, when you
Yeah.
go on vacation for a few days, your phone's not ringing too much. Your texts aren't really coming through, and your emails, people know you're gone. So you expect it to be kind of quiet. But it's a month later and nobody's calling you. Nobody needs you.
Nobody needs you.
And
Yeah.
you're not the one putting out fires anymore, right? That is very real. And on one hand, you're so glad. No, nobody needs it.
You go
Somebody else
cry
is
in your
taking
new
care of
hot
this,
tub. You
right?
cry in your boat, right? Like you can.
But there is a human need for significance and to matter and to make a difference.
Yeah.
And so it's a major adjustment. And like you said, not for everybody. Some people are totally fine, but for others, it's I think for the majority, it if if somebody has multiple businesses or something and they exit one, yeah, it's probably not going to be that big of an impact. But when you've got one business and you've tied up, my entire career has been tied up in a very similar industry in one focused business, uh, and now it's no longer needed. And you're watching your peers and your coach and the whole industry is moving on, and you're just like seeing the updates on LinkedIn, but you're really not a part of it anymore. And
How did that? I mean, you're talking about it, but I can't quite tell what the emotion was for you. What were you feeling around that?
uh, very almost an anxiousness would be the emotion, I think. Almost
Like a
like
fear of missing out sort of thing, or
it was more just I've always had something to do, something that was always a fire to put out. And if there wasn't, there was something we could start working on strategy and building something and do. And you're always conquering, and there's nothing to conquer now. Now
and
now my family and all that that's in place and better than ever and working out exactly the way I wanted. But I wasn't needed. It was not like I'm doing caretaker stuff where I'm needed
24/7.
24/7.
Yeah.
You still have a lot of time. I talk about the Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. What are you doing? I mean, I went on a lot of walks. I listened to a lot of books and a lot of self-discipline not to start something else.
Yes. Yes, I know. I get
Because
that.
it's so easy to jump back in or go now you get
Build
some
a
money to go invest in somebody else's business and
Yeah.
make bad choices that end up y- more stressful and more draining than if you stayed in the business you
Hmm.
sold. And that's a trap. And that's one thing I heard from a lot of friends of mine who had sold their businesses was their advice to me was wait at least a year
Yeah.
before you
Yeah.
get involved in anything. And of course, I waited longer than that, but mine was a little different in that I had a very strong why, which was my family. So when I would get a little, kind of anxious about not, feeling that kind of that energy, that stress, I would kind of ground myself like, no, the reason I did this was for my family and that's happening and I'm going to be glad about it and I'm going to, be secure in that. Reminds me of the world famous sniper Carlos Hathcock. I don't know if you've ever heard the story, but the phrase that comes from it is he said, "I made the decision when I was in my right mind, even when he was getting eaten by the ants and no food and just basically army crawling across this place over in Vietnam for days to take out a target, but it was." He had to ground himself and remind himself, I made this decision to do this when I was in my right mind. So whatever's happening around me now is just noise and distractions. I'm going to see it through.
Hmm.
And I kind of have to, that's similar to how it was for me. Um, it may not be that hard for everybody, but it was challenging. And it's not like I was, 65, 70 years old where I've kind of been preparing for this for a long time and I'm going to retire and I've got my life planned out. I mean, this was a little bit unexpected even for me, even though I had a year from the time I decided to do it. So,
So this took you to Waypoint Founders,
yeah,
just like it sounds, waypointfounders.com.
yeah,
Tell me what led to you building Waypoint Founders and what is it you do?
yeah. When I sold the business, I was a member of YPO Network. and had been for 7 years, I think, at that point.
Yeah.
And I went to renew after I sold the company, and they're like, well, where's your qualifying company? You got to have a company with a certain amount of employees and revenue and so forth. And I'm like, well, I sold it. And they said, well, you have to have a company if you're going to be a part of YPO. And I said, well, I've been for 7 years, and isn't this what we're all trying to do? Like, we're trying to build a company and sell it and exit well and all that. And I talked to a lot of friends at YPO who was trying to move it up the chain, multiple different people at high levels, and no one could make an exception. And and that's not a poor me story. I mean, I have tremendous respect for YPO, and there's a tremendous things came out of that. But what it is was a realization that nothing really does exist out there for people after the sale.
Yeah.
Network wise, support wise, like I said earlier, nobody wants to hear how a retired millionaire is struggling. And we're not just struggling. We need community. We need safe place to talk and discuss things with people who get it, who understand it, and purpose. And I think with Waypoint, it covers so much of it does cover the post exit portion after you've sold with purpose and identity and kind of working through those things. But we really ideally we catch the person before they ever go to market and start preparing them for what to expect. And we're not M&A advisors, we're not sell side advisors. We are just focused on helping and real life stories and kind of exercises. And here's a map of some things to expect. We use the lighthouse metaphor and the ship coming in from off the ocean, right? You as the entrepreneur are the captain of your ship, but now you're coming into the harbor. And when you come into the harbor, an unknown harbor, you have an harbor pilot that jumps on the boat. And this is real life. And they steer you around these sandbars and these traps that can happen. They know that water. And that's what we do. We come in and help them bring that ship all the way to harbor.
Look at you going back to your roots, back in
Absolutely.
the fisherman
Yep.
days. Well, and so obviously it's not just founders that have exited. This is for founders that have are looking to exit.
Looking to exit at any point in that process, Waypoint is going to be of great value to someone. The ones that are going to get the most value from it are those that start with us before they even go to market.
Yeah.
If you're a few years out and you're just starting to think about it, then Waypoint's a great place for you to land and to start. You're gonna be in the room. Here's the thing. There's a lot of 1 day, 2 day events out there for this that people have that great organizations have that are kind of, if you're interested in possibly selling your business, come to this seminar. We're going to have people talking about it. We'll have split off groups and we'll, go through kind of what to expect. But once that day's over, you're done. I mean, this Waypoint is there month after month to go. It's that room month after month, and it's all virtual. So you're not having to fly off to Chicago for a 1 or 2 day seminar. And it's a community of people doing the same thing. And you really are learning from people at all different phases through it.
No,
And
you
it's a tremendous help to people that are looking to sell their business.
you got my attention. This is what a cool story. We went way longer than I expected. Thank you for the extra time here. What's the best way
For
for people to reach you? Is it through the website or is there another way people can reach out to you?
The best way is through waypointfounders.com or LinkedIn. I'm very
Okay.
active on LinkedIn as well. You can email me directly. It's jonathan@waypointfounders.com. But to get the spelling right, maybe just go to the website and click the link, and then
There
you
it
can
is. Yep,
get
right
to
at the
me.
bottom of the page. Jonathan at waypointfounders.com. Jonathan, Sherrill, thank you for the time. What an amazing story. It's a great
Thank you,
journey.
Dave.
And
I
you're not even
appreciate it.
halfway through, man.
Yeah. Well,
So much more to go.
absolutely. Well, thank you for the inviting me on here, and it's been great. Enjoyed talking with you, and look forward to staying in touch.
Likewise.